Good evening. I'm Eve Vogelstein, president of Great Talk, and thank you for joining us for this live and virtual conversation for sharing ideas with the very best minds. Great Talk was founded by Claudine Davison, our executive director, and our vice president, Diane Davison. I joined as president along with our outstanding board, and the goodwill of so many enables us all of us to enjoy these thought-provoking and educational programs. Tonight, I would like to thank our Great Talk Gold sponsors, the Zaf McKinney Group at Morgan Stanley, at LifeBridge Health, as well as our silver sponsor, our GWWO Architects, and its principal, Chris Elcock, also a member of our board. We are most grateful to our longtime valued partner, the Alexander Grass Humanities Institute at Johns Hopkins University, and its director, William Eggington. Thank you to our media co-sponsors, WYPR, the Baltimore Fishbowl, the Baltimore Sun, for their support. And to those of you who donated to our event, we thank you greatly. And if you still would like to donate, it's never too late, and your donations are tax deductible. A recording of this event will be posted on YouTube, and updates on our future Great Talk events can be found on our website, greattalk.org. We are deeply grateful to our fellow board member, Diane Hoffman, Director, Law and Healthcare Program, and Jacob A. France, Professor of Healthcare Law, for hosting tonight's program here at the University of Maryland Francis K. Carey School of Law. There will be a question and answer following our panel discussion. And you might appreciate that tonight's topic is quite timely. I would now like to introduce Diane Hoffman, who will introduce the panel and moderator for our Great Talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Eve, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the University of Maryland Law School. It's our pleasure to host this event this evening, and as you heard, I have the privilege of introducing our panelists. So I'm going to start with the lady in the green, Elisabeth BUMILLER, who is a writer at large for the New York Times. She was most recently Washington bureau chief. Previously, she held the position of Washington editor, and before that, deputy Washington bureau chief, overseeing White House and domestic policy reporting. Before moving to Washington, she was the Times City Hall bureau chief, responsible for covering Mayor Rudolph Giuliani and his Senate race against Hillary Rodham Clinton. From 1979 to 1985, she worked for the Washington Post in Washington, New Delhi, Tokyo, and New York. She's the author of 3 books, Condoleezza Rice, An American Life, May You Be the Mother of 100 Sons, A Journey Among the Women of India, and The Secrets of Mariko, A Year in the Life of a Japanese Woman and Her Family. Next, James Mattingly, who, do you want to raise your hand? He is originally from the Silicon Valley in California. He studied great books at St. John's in Annapolis and physics at UC Santa Cruz. He then returned to a study of the history and philosophy of science at Indiana University, where he received a PhD. And shortly before that, he was appointed assistant professor in the Georgetown University's philosophy department, where he is today a philosophy professor. His research is primarily in philosophy of science, focusing on issues involving conceptual change in the sciences, the epistemology of science, the nature of scientific theories, and scientific explanation on the one hand. And then on the other hand, he focuses on quantum gravity, general relativity, black holes and singularities, gauge theories, thermodynamics, and electrodynamics. More recently, he has been trying to understand in what sense we can call any machines agents and what that entails going forward as AI appears to progress rapidly. He is the author of Information and Experimental Knowledge, the editor of the Sage Encyclopedia of Theory in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, and co-author of Machine Agency. Next is YITZHAK MELAMED, who is the Charlotte Bloomberg Professor of Philosophy at Johns Hopkins University. He's a professor in the Department of Philosophy, and he holds an MA in Philosophy and the History of Science and Logic from Tel Aviv University, and a PhD in Philosophy from Yale University. He's been awarded the Fulbright, Mellon, and American Academy for Jewish Research Fellowships. He works at the intersection of philosophy, primarily metaphysics, Jewish and religious studies, the history of science, and the humanities in general. In particular, he's interested in well-argued views that are commonly treated as counterintuitive. Such views, he thinks, may help us challenge our own well-fortified beliefs, force us to motivate what we deem to be obvious, and reveal our conceptual blind spots. And fourth, we have in the middle, OLASOV, and he is an adjunct lecturer at NYU Center for Bioethics. He's the author of Ask a Philosopher, Answers to Your Most Important and Most Unexpected Questions, and a co-editor of A Companion to Public Philosophy. He's also the president of the Public Philosophy Network, an organization that advocates and develops resources for philosophers working with communities outside of academia, from prisons to policymakers. For several years, he set up an Ask a Philosopher booths around New York City, answering questions from passersby. He holds a PhD in philosophy from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. His research interests are broad, but revolve around questions about speech in the public interest. And then it is also my pleasure to introduce our moderator this evening, Katie Curran O'Malley. She was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, where she attended Towson University and the University of Baltimore School of Law. She began her legal career as a prosecutor in the Baltimore County State's Attorney's Office. In her role as a prosecutor, she presented hundreds of criminal cases before judges and juries in the district and circuit courts of Baltimore County. In 2001, she was appointed to the District Court of Maryland for Baltimore City, where she presided over thousands of criminal and civil cases, including domestic violence cases. Over the course of her career, she's become an expert in handling cases involving domestic violence. As a result of her many years of experience working with intimate partner violence victims, the District Court of Maryland tasked her with training newly appointed judges on how to effectively handle such cases. And just a year ago, or a little over a year ago, in January of 2024, the Women's Law Center of Maryland named Katie as their new executive director. In this role, she continues to advocate for those experiencing domestic violence, family law, employment law, and sexual assault. With that, I will turn it over to Judge O'Malley.
Thank you. Thank you. Can everybody hear me? I hope so, because I've been told that I have to keep this microphone very, very close. I also have a great outside voice, but I'm afraid for online viewers that wouldn't be off. It might not work. So good evening, and thank you so much for having me here. Claudine reached out and asked me to be the moderator of these brilliant panelists, and so I'm really humbled to be able to ask you questions and genuinely interested in, because of the times that we are experiencing now in our country, in these pertinent questions and what the answers are. So why don't I begin with the one question that I think everybody right now wants to know is, in our society now, who would you all believe, or who should we all believe, are the arbiters when it comes to good judgment and leadership? It's a tough one.
I mean, I'll take a crack at it. Not because I have any special insight into that, but just to be a little bit provocative, I would say that one of the main problems in society at the moment is we don't have such arbiters, that those who are suited to fill the roles are not taken seriously as performing them, and those who are absolutely unsuited to these roles are arrogating them to themselves.
Can you give examples?
The most powerful unelected bureaucrat in the history of the world right now, Elon Musk, who's incredibly ill-suited to doing anything other than running a company, is now thinking that it's appropriate for him to dismantle an entire bureaucratic structure that's been responsible for a lot of the prosperity of the post-World War II United States, and all in service of some mystical vision of the far future where we're all living on 1,000 different planets.
Mm-hmm. I have to wait for this to turn on. I would ask this as a question. What would you all think about nominating the Pope who just passed away? I mean, what did you say?
Not bad at all.
Okay, but because some people would certainly disagree with that. But I was trying to think of one person who would get a lot of votes, and that would be this Pope. And I don't think but I would like to hear some dissent.
No, I'm not dissenting.
So the deceased Pope to be the arbiter. Well, maybe 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. Okay. All right. And as a Reformed Catholic, I guess I could say, or a recovering Catholic. I'm not a Catholic. I was, and I don't practice, but I just, because the church has had so many issues with the cover-ups over the years, I just don't know if, because of maybe not him actively being a part of that, but I can't imagine that he didn't have knowledge of the things that were happening around the world when it came to abuse of children, and covering that up. So I don't know if he, even though he was probably one of the best, most progressive leaders of the church ever, and I don't know if we'll ever see another one like that, I wouldn't want that. Good point. Good point. I was trying to think of somebody who would get a lot of support, right? And some decent, somebody who, but again, he was extremely controversial in our times. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to think, people always are much more admired after they're gone. So I was trying to think of somebody else in history, but I can't think of anybody else right now.
Is it like corny to just say us? Just to say that not us, but
people.
That the people are as expert as anyone on the matters that concern them locally, and when you give people an opportunity to deliberate about the political problems, not necessarily at the level of the federal government, but the political problems that affect them municipally, or that affect them in their day-to-day lives and their workplaces and so on, they make pretty good decisions. There's a tricky question about how you mobilize that knowledge, or how you get the knowledge that's in the brains of the hundreds of millions of people who make up the country into the right sorts of decision-making, spaces. But I trust exactly no one, with no disrespect to the Pope. I trust exactly no one on literally everything, but I trust just about everyone on matters that concern them very locally.
If I might suggest a kind of a semi-heretical question. I mean, perhaps we don't need leadership. I mean, yes, you need leadership, but I think that U.S. culture is okay. My sense, at least, as someone who's coming from outside, I mean, I was not born here. I mean, I immigrated to the U.S. when I was 27 years old. The culture here is really fascinated with this notion of leadership. And I understand why, but there is also something deeply undemocratic about that. The kind of admiration of certain group that is supposed to be at that level of leadership. And I think that perhaps we should, if you think about the German translation of the word leader, doesn't sound good. Not really. So perhaps we should have a kind of a more ambivalent attitude, not necessarily negative, but kind of a more ambivalent attitude towards the notion of leadership. I mean, in itself, it's a problematic notion. I mean, perhaps there is no way but to avoid it. But still, I think that, I can easily see how this notion of leadership, which is used in order to achieve all kinds of things which are unhealthy. So.
I'll just add, I mean, clearly the two of you are not a million miles apart on this. And something that struck me when Ian was talking is that it sounds right. And it sounds good to give power to the people, I guess, maybe to coin a phrase. But that leaves open the question, how does one effectuate that? And it's connected to this problem of leadership, right? As you say, it's hard to get along without it, but it's hard to use it without fetishizing it. And that seems to be the kind of the problem, at least in the United States right now, that instead of using leadership to empower this kind of local, regional, municipal, taking control of your own destiny, we're handing power to leaders rather than using them to facilitate the exercise of our own power.
But you are all speaking at the current day. Would you be saying this? Would you have been saying this during the Obama administration? Would you have said the same thing, or would you have said he's a pretty good leader? I mean, are you speaking now of maybe you disagree? But I'm just looking at political biases here.
Right. I would have always a suspicion of any leader, literally any leader.
Maybe since you came from Israel.
That might be one reason. Another reason might be because there is a kind of, in Judaism, since the days of the Bible, there is some sort of animosity towards any kind of human dominion of sorts. I mean, but yes, I mean, I think that I understand the need. Moreover, I'll tell you more. I think that one of the problems right now, not generally, but actually, I think it is general problem, is that there's supposed to be a layer of civil servants that are supposed to be independent from the political leadership. There must be a buffer zone, and it should be as strong as possible in order to protect these people from the political leadership. And I'm just, again, as an outsider, I'm amazed at how weak this buffer zone is currently.
Well, it's particularly weak right now, but it's been much stronger in the past in this country, with the highly educated, long-serving civil service.
Sure, but there is an Aramaic proverb saying that it's not the mice who is the thief, but it's the hole in the wall that is the thief. The fact that we are speaking about a political structure that allows or invites abuse, as it is happening right now, it means that there is something about the structure, about the entire political structure, that was not thinking carefully about how this kind of abuse is likely to occur.
Well, what political structure would work for you?
For example, I don't think that FBI, the heads of FBI, heads of CIA, I think that the appointment should be completely as much independent from the political administration as possible. They should not be appointments that are coming with this administration or another.
Well, the FBI director serves 10 years normally.
Right.
So that was the plan there. Okay, so we're breaking a lot of norms right now. And the Fed chair serves.
That's how it should be.
Right, but
These are all wonderful views. I mean, but that sounds more like an outcome that you're interested in, rather than the kind of the structural question that I think you were asking about, like how do you ensure that the institutions that you've built to promote these aims is actually without holes in the wall?
So the hope is that when you pass this period, God's willing, there will be enough goodwill coming from, there will be enough goodwill. Sure. There will be enough goodwill coming from both sides of the aisle in order to create these kinds of serious defenses of democracy. I mean, because someone who saw what happened in the previous Trump administration should be aware of things like that are going to happen. If we're not going to create these kind of defenses of civil servants, the system invites abuse and
Right. And I think just to move it along a little bit, I think what's happening here, I think is what we're all seeing, what we're all witnessing is the deterioration of the rule of law or just the complete lack of acknowledgement that there is a rule of law. And we're seeing how fragile democracy is with every day new things happening, people being deported without due process, civil servants who are supposed to be serving without, being taken out based on, who the president is or isn't. All of that is being eroded. And what can we do about it? That's the big issue. So, I mean, that's where we're seeing this sort of democratic crisis. So I think it was set up very well. I mean, there was a balance of powers and all of that, but we're seeing a challenge to it, which makes us all realize just how fragile our democracy is. But let me ask you all another question when it comes to elections and politics. And what role do you see fear playing, and how effective do you think the leaders who are, what party, doesn't matter, but using fear to gain popularity?
Well, that has worked a lot in my experience. I'm thinking back to covering in 2004. I was covering the White House, George W. Bush's reelection, and yes, he used the fear of another 9/11, and that I think is what basically put him over the top. And John Kerry just couldn't quite stand up to that. The fear of there had been a lot of abuses during the first term of George W., but people were so afraid of another 11, they were willing to live with some encroachments on their personal freedom. And I think, obviously, I'm trying to think of Obama. It certainly worked. It certainly has worked with Trump. If not the fear of another attack, but the fear of more inflation and all the things he ran on, and immigration. Course. So I think that works, and if you covered politics for a long time, you sort of, the conventional wisdom is that political candidates have to be positive and talk about, like Reagan, and talk about, the shrouding city on the hill and have a very optimistic vision about America. That hasn't worked recently. It's the fear that has really, really worked.
Interestingly, what I think Reagan and Clinton both had in common is, well, sunniness, but still very personal. And I think that's one of the main engines that makes fear work, is just how personal it is. So it's not only that one party uses fear more than the other. The left was using nothing but fear in this last election round, but, fear of fascism, fear of abstract concepts, and fear of abstract concepts just doesn't cut in the ice. Whereas personal fear, right, getting
loss of money, your taxes,
your family, your guns, your this, your that. Yeah. And I think that's where folks like Trump just, dominate the field, because it's not just a fear-driven message, but a very personal one. And his shtick is just mimicking back to people what they themselves are saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's... Is this on? Yes, it is. I think this is helpful. So there are different sorts of fears that are stoked by the current administration among its supporters and among its detractors. And I do think that I do think the fears that liberals and leftists sort of express publicly these days are genuinely motivating to them, and I think we can, but I think we should watch. I think we should watch out for ways that they might motivate them to do things that aren't actually in their best interests. So, I think it was.
What do you mean?
I think it was really hard from 2016 to 2020 to tell the difference between real political problems and nonsense from the administration, from just sort of like empty threats. I have a really hard time telling this these days, but like I think the annexation of Greenland is a plausible example of this. I think there's approximately zero chance we will annex Greenland, but people motivated broadly by fear, maybe by a cluster of other attitudes too, but partly by fear, spend a lot of time talking about something that's never going to happen. And now, it's hard to make predictions. Some things that you think are never going to happen have a funny way of happening. But but I think that a lot of our political discourse revolves around often wildly implausible worst case scenarios when we might be better off talking about things that are happening right now or things that are matters of greater certainty.
Well, I would just say that about half the messages on the left is like that, but what's coming now is a more personal message about your jobs, your neighbors, your friends, and so we'll see whether it goes the way that you're worried about, where people drop the ball, or it goes some other direction.
Yeah, just
one small point. I mean, okay, one small point. Fear is human. I mean, we all fear, and I cannot. To try to abstract people and release them from fear is not only impossible, I'm not sure that it's even desirable. I mean, because to some extent, I mean, at least in politics, I mean, fear is able to run powers and some degree of fear. I mean, so I would like actually the sovereign or the most powerful people to be fearful, right? I mean, because otherwise, I don't know what people are going to do if they are not going to be afraid of the kind of checks and balances that are around. So I understand the issue of politics of fear, especially, of course, you don't want to live in a tyranny. You don't want to live when people are just all the time afraid. But in some sense, I mean, again, the fear is part of politics. And in a good democracy, there should be some ways in which, yes, the most powerful should be the most fearful.
It's interesting, like Elizabeth was saying, it used to be, we had John F. Kennedy saying, ask not, that famous speech that he gave at his inauguration, what America can do for you, but what you can do for America, and there's more that unites us than divides us. We hear, speeches like that, but they're not the winning. That's not what's happening now. Like these.
Well, but Obama was a message of hope and change, right? He was positive. Clinton was positive. George W., the first campaign was positive, basically. I think. What we debate this all the time at the New York Times was what I think we've got an answer now. It was whether Trump was an aberration in 2016 or whether he was a symptom of he was obviously both, but he's less of an aberration now. He's a symptom of a large chunk of the country who feels left out. Obviously, this is not news to anyone, but I still think the positive message is carried more often in this country than not. And I think it's, I'm probably too much of an optimist, but right now
we need that.
Right now.
All right.
I think it's not too optimistic to say that positive messages can work, and if the sort of hope and change rhetoric of 2008 feels a little sort of anemic now, it's because it was always a little anemic. What hoping for what kind of change exactly? Having some sort of positive vision that has rough sort of rough outlines. I'd like to see more peace. I would like to see the planet stop melting. I would like to see a strengthened labor movement. I would like to see, the worst people in America who are currently running the country not having all that much power. I'd like to see people having more free time rather than being stuck at work, making not very much money. I'd like to see all sorts of things that are relatively concrete. It's in the power of politicians to express positive views about their vision for the future. They've just proven a little reluctant, at least out of our two political parties, they've proven a little reluctant to do that in any concrete way. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So how do you, as philosophers and journalists, explain innocent but false reasoning that is not always taken seriously, but is yet strongly influential?
Example, please. I mean, innocent but false reasoning. Innocent but false?
Can you explain that, Claudine? Like, because I can see the false, but I'm not sure if it's so innocent. Yeah, with that question,
People who are clueless, you mean?
Well, it's people who are spreading false information, but they don't do it with bad intentions.
so information that, right, that they're getting, because there's so much information. I think what Claudine's saying with this question is that there's so much information that people get on the World Wide Web, and some of it can be very deceptive and it can be very dangerous. So information, say, about the environment,
the caravans, flooding into the United States from the border, at the border. Right. True. Right.
and information that they then post on social media, again, bringing up fear and making people fearful. But they truly believe that this is all happening. Watching certain news broadcasts, certain stations that project a lot of propaganda about issues that are not necessarily true. They are fearful. Like, I know, for example, I have a friend whose parents are probably in their 80s, and they're extremely fearful because they watch a certain news station that makes them think all of their money is going to be taken, all of their savings, by a certain party. So they spread that through their friends and talk about it. You know what I mean? So
my husband and I went to buy a car in Bethesda, which is a very liberal enclave, and the salesman told us unequivocally, this is right after January 6th, he told us that, he understood there was a lot of intifada there, and they really were the ones who caused January 6th. And we looked at him and went, okay, but that was innocent.
it was innocent, and they truly believed it. And my friend's parents are very smart people, but they were watching stuff over and over again and getting influenced by this and spreading it.
Well, I'll just answer for me, and then the philosophers should go at this. But I just would say, I get asked this question constantly as about the New York Times. What can you do to combat this? Well, we report every day what we know, to the best of our knowledge at the time is the truth, and we do fact checking, and we do all sorts of things. Now we have videos, but we can't make everybody read us or watch it, and we have a broad reach, but it's still doesn't reach all over this country. So that's what we do. But and we, especially during campaigns, we do constant fact checking of the candidates. But we have full-time fact checkers now. I mean, it's a lot out there that never used to be out there because of the reach of the internet, obviously. Mm-hmm. So that's my answer.
I think one thing that's worth asking is sort of like, what is distinctive about our time? So people have always not been great at reasoning. There's never been any point in time in the past where people are like, yes, we knew the truth then, and now we don't. So one thing that might be distinctive is the structure of our social networks, or how we can communicate our reasoning to other people. So I don't have any, to keep things positive, I don't think I have any really knockdown, I have the solution, just listen to me, give me a couple $1 billion, I'll solve all your problems. But a lot of sort of the people writing about the political economy of the internet find themselves often from very different, starting from very different political points of view, often end up recommending that social networks should be more online. Social media platforms should be more like place-based subreddits, like so where people talk to one another, who they have some connection to in like meet space that they actually have a chance of meeting at the local library or whatever. That maybe some of our tendencies towards spreading the worst reasoning and engaging in it without consequence are enabled by having lots of conversations with people that we have no chance of meeting in person. So yeah, maybe part of the solution is like making social media more like place-based subreddits and less like you know, yelling at strangers in the comments threads.
Yeah, I like the idea. I wonder though why. I think you're right. Misinformation, believing the first thing you hear on any topic. That this is how philosophers explain the prevalence of this is that human nature is just this way. That the first thing we hear on a topic is what we believe about it, by and large. But agreeing that that's always been true, and we've always been under a circuit of misinformation, the solution you're pointing to, it's just going to return us to a kind of time when people with aberrational views were just afraid to articulate them, knowing that they would be stamped down by the folks in their surroundings. So if it's a place-based message, then there's nothing to hide behind, and so I don't know. That doesn't really offer any kind of positive solution to it, and I don't know that I think there is a solution to it, just given the kind of creatures that we are, and you know, the more you argue with people, the more you realize that arguments don't do anything, and that this is David Hume figured this out a very long time ago. What drives our beliefs is not our reason, but our passions. And if you have a fastidious turn of mind, like a lot of philosophers do, and you don't want to exercise the passions to make people change their views, then it looks like you're playing a losing game.
YITZHAK?
Yeah, so I think that just to respond to the issue about human and passions and human.
It's not the mic. Maybe it is.
Just to respond to the issue of whether human beings are responding to reasons or to passions, at least my impression is that a lot of times people are reasoning. The point is that they are just using epicycles around it, right? I mean, they will have their own way of rephrasing or rearranging the facts so that they will fit what they take to be their political views. I assume that part of the reason why we are today in the current situation, stuck in the current situation, is the fragmentation of American society and the fragmentation of the media, so that you will have the people that are just they are getting their information from MSNBC. You have the people that are getting their information from Fox News, and they are just reconstructing reality, and they are living in different realities. Of course, I mean, they're just living. I mean, you can say that they live in the same world, but that's not precise. I don't know what's the solution to that. I can tell you just one thing. I tried, I experimented with myself. Just after October 7th, I was trying to understand what was going on in Israel. And for something like half a year, I was reading the news. I was systematically every day reading the news from the Iranian news agencies till the Israeli radical settlers, trying to get something like 12 points of view or 12 sources. The problem is that it's crazy. I mean, you're spending I have some life to do and I have some other things to do. So, and you can try to diversify your sources of information and then try to find what is reliable, what is a kind of a twist that someone is doing. But, you know, I mean,
It didn't change your mind in any way whatsoever, I'm assuming, reading the Iranian press?
Well, it did. I mean, from time to time, occasionally, yes, just reading the Iranian press, or reading Al Jazeera, I could see some views that they are making more or less sense. I could see all kinds of things where they're coming from. I mean, I can understand. So I get a kind of a more complex view of what is happening, but it's a full-time job.
Right. I mean, but then you have to talk. But there have been studies where people have been asked to watch CNN for a month or watch Fox, and their views change along with what they're seeing on the net, on the cable. So people can be influenced. Maybe not a philosopher who, from Israel, who's, you may be too set in your ways. I mean, possibly.
Well, in my case, I was trying to watch several opposite news sources, and it's in some way it is just driving you crazy, because you almost every single fact you need to understand what precisely is the fact, what is the reconstruction, so it's a bit crazy. It's interesting, but it's also it's a lot of work.
I'll just float one idea that I think is kind of important in the psychological and philosophical literature on trust in science. The idea of the deficit model of trust or mistrust in science has come to be this kind of punching bag in recent years. I think mostly fairly. That I think people have thought, where the idea of the deficit model is that if people don't trust scientists, it's because they just haven't heard enough information. You just need to pour just a little bit more information into their ears, and then eventually they'll come to have the right attitudes. And part of the problem is that if people don't trust you, then talking to them won't make them trust you more necessarily, or just informing them won't make you trust them more. Part of the problem is that people have real reasons for mistrust often, which are worth taking seriously. If you are a woman with heart disease, and sort of the history of medical research on women with heart disease has been pretty bad, you have perfectly good reason to distrust what doctors say, because they've been wrong historically. If you are, a black man with syphilis in the United States, and given the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, I would be pretty careful about hanging around doctors. People have real reasons for mistrust, and they should be responded to. I'm really influenced by the philosopher Maya Goldenberg's book, Vaccine Hesitancy Here. I think Maya Goldenberg just gets a lot right. I recommend the book really highly. And so, one example of something that she holds up as a response, the book was written before the pandemic, but published in the early days of the pandemic. The one example that she holds up of a sort of reasonably successful propaganda, public education campaign around vaccination was in Australia, where at least in certain parts of Australia, a lot of resistance to vaccines was MMR vaccines was coming from sort of crunchy hippie types. And so they had this public health campaign called the I Immunize campaign. And there's all people wearing sort of, hippie-ish outfits saying I eat organic, I, use cloth diapers, and I immunize, or I, listen to Fish and I immunize, or whatever. So it's sort of so I think sometimes we look at the prevalence of identity protective reasoning and we despair. But identities are mushy, malleable things, and you can put identity protection to all sorts of purposes if you're creative enough about it. I don't think the I Immunize campaign single-handedly just got everyone vaccinated in Australia, but it did have some measurable effects. It's not nothing, right? So there's some reason for hope there that if you see people being identity protective to a fault, then just think about parts of their identities which can be motivated to get them closer to the truth rather than further away from it.
So when it comes to the truth, Are there any absolutes, or is everything just sort of relative to people's perceptions? You know, that's kind of a very out there, but like when it comes to science, but you know, are there absolutes, or you know, that's I think one of the great debates. Like, are there really any truths?
It seems like there are a number of different questions in the neighborhood right there. So one is this question about, are there things just true, and those are independent of what anybody now or ever thinks about them, is one very important question for a philosophy class. But more on point, I think, is your question about science and are there absolutes there? And even if you're the kind of person who thinks, as I probably do, that there are indeed absolutes, that there are certain things that just are true, and that doesn't really matter who's thinking them or who's believing them, that doesn't really touch on this issue, because science is not a kind of discipline that's necessarily set up to uncover those things. I'm thinking about the very great logician Richard Jeffrey, who advocated that scientists should never offer settled views. They should never offer opinions about the truth of the scientific results. That they're always in an interim position, saying, as far as we can tell, the probabilities are such and such, and the distribution of our expectations is such and such. And then if you ask him, well, what's your advice? He would say, you don't want advice from me as a scientist, because I don't offer advice. That's not what the sciences are about. The sciences are about collecting and gathering as much information as we can and organizing it in the most felicitous way possible, so that we can get a sense for how the world is structured. But it's policymakers who give you advice. And so this is one of the main disrailments of how to respond to science hesitancy, if you like, during the pandemic, is there's no such thing as following the science. There is the science. There is a particular view that's the most probable one, that has certain things speaking in its favor, certain things speaking against it. But at the end of the day, as Jeffrey said, you have to make a decision now. Am I going to go skating on the ice, even though I know that the probability is non-zero that the ice is not going to hold me? And so when people go out and skate on the ice and fall in and take a chill, that's fine for science if the scientists haven't told them that you will never fall in, that we absolutely know what's going on. But we don't absolutely know what's going on, even if, as I say, you like me and you kind of think that there is something that's absolutely true about what's going on.
Is there absolute truth in theoretical math? Like when you, with the theorem, my son is a mathematician, so I often think he lives in that world. But am I right? I don't know how he would answer that, actually.
So
You prove it.
So yes, but it's not absolutely clear that we have the right axioms of mathematics. So the mathematical community at the moment has a system of axioms that they take to be governing the entire discipline, and everything must be situated and articulated with respect to all of those axioms. But again, unlike those people, I was raised by an intuitionist who doesn't think that any of these mathematical claims are actually what the contemporary mathematicians think. So maybe somebody's right about this, and maybe there is something right, but that's not really something that we're in a position to find out about.
Yeah,
I just want to add something that I assume it's pretty obvious, but there is an interesting switch or turn in terms of the political dimensions of relativism. I mean, at least in the 25 years ago, I mean, relativism was associated with postmodern leftist politics, etc. Over the past 10, 15 years, you have it, or you have suddenly the Stephen Bannon version of that. It comes, I mean, and I think that he's aware of that. He's aware that he is, so when talk about alternative facts and alternative, it's precisely the same kind of just saying, oh, okay, here's my narrative, your narrative. Now, again, I thought that there are some interesting, there were some interesting insights that were coming from postmodern theories of 20, 25 years ago, but I thought that always there was a danger there, and there was a lot of stupid talk, literally stupid talk. I think that right now you see some of the results of that, I mean, which is just inviting, the kind of, here's your narrative, my narrative. I mean, who cares about facts?
If I could add just one, maybe this is just like a little too blunt, but I think sometimes people have concerns about the certainty with which people speak, and I think this is broadly in line with what you've been saying. But they frame those questions about certainty or objectivity in terms of truth itself, and crudely, I think that's just mystification. It's just trying to make a sort of metaphysical point out of something that's sort of like relatively close to home, relatively familiar, which is like sometimes you are reasonably sure that such and such is the case, but you can't be 100% sure. It's still possible that it's not true. So I think a lot of talk about alternative facts or literally living in your own world, that people literally occupy different universes or something, is maybe a helpful metaphor or maybe like a juicy image or something like that, but strictly speaking, mystifying. We can describe what's going on when people talk in this way, just in terms of what evidence people do or do have, and whether they're appropriately certain or not, appropriately uncertain, or appropriately tentative or not appropriately tentative.
Just add one epicyclist that I'm pretty sure that can be true, even if, as I think YITZHAK was hinting at, it is also literally true that there's no clear meaning to the idea of a shared reality.
Interesting. So with the onset of AI now, in the schools, kids using ChatGPT and all of that, how do you envision the future of knowledge? Do you think AI is going to be smarter than us? Do you think AI is going to take over?
Well, it's something people talk to journalists about because, it's we're certainly not there yet with journalism. We have done experiments where you ask the Chat GPT to write a story in the style of me, or Peter Baker, our chief White House correspondent, and it comes out exactly the same. And it's completely banal and ordinary and embarrassing. And thank God, because they haven't taken our jobs yet, right? So I don't know, but I hear that people think that it can write a pretty good cover letter. I'm just kind of surprised. I think it's very banal is the word for it in terms of writing. I'm not too concerned about it, but I know, we use it for data, for compiling data. It's very helpful in that way. Mm-hmm. And, we're obviously concerned about it at the times because our competitors could use it in different ways. But so far, I don't know. I feel like I guess it's going to be very powerful, but so far I have a sense that it's kind of the big excitement has died down a little bit, at least for now. I don't know.
James, do you see with, that was really interesting, Elizabeth, about how fortunately your job's not going to be replaced because it didn't do it.
Well, we'll see.
But with kids doing papers, especially, and I'm sure a lot of your students have to write papers, right?
Well, this has been a serious concern, obviously, and the good news is that the creative writing people and even some of the philosophy instructors have figured out some reasonably good ways to mitigate this that, in fact, turn out to be better than what we had before. I was recently reading an article about how to teach writing now for philosophers, and Canvas makes a very good tool for this. Canvas is a kind of a software program for classroom management and so forth, and it has a facility to put students into quiz mode so that none of the other features of the computer will work. And so you can't enforce that at home, obviously. So you dedicate some of the course time to actual writing of papers now. and you write maybe for half an hour during one course session. And then when you go home, you can do all the research you want. You can ask chat as many things as you want and so forth. You can even take some notes, but you can't copy and paste anything at all into this document. When you come back, you have to then start typing again. And so you have to at least have consumed and processed and, reformulated the things that you're writing. And I've always wanted to do that in classes anyway, but this is just such a much better excuse for doing that. And yeah, it takes up some of the instruction times, but I don't think of myself as that scintillating an instructor. So I think maybe this is better for them.
Did you do that as a reaction to AI? Was that a reaction to knowing that this could be when you were saying, all right, you've got to write a 10-page paper and I want to do, and you bring it in and you were noticing that?
Well, I haven't done this. I was reading about this semester. And so going forward, I'll probably do that. But I've always had very short writing assignments in class just to have students reacting in the moment, getting the practice of taking something in through their ears and then getting it to come out through their hands. Mm-hmm. I think that's always a very useful thing already. But this just makes me want to double down on the length and the utility of the in-class writing.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. YITZHAK?
First of all, I think that AI is going to give us all kinds of tools to amplify our power, etc. And I agree with that. I think with the points that Elizabeth was making. With regard to philosophy, in some way, I think that any philosophical question that is answerable by AI is not a philosophical question. I mean, it's simply not that. I mean, about a year and a half ago, it was about the beginning of ChatGPT, or it's slightly more than the beginning. I was experimenting with a couple of technical philosophical questions, and it's the answers that you get from ChatGPT are pathetic. I mean, they are just so ordinary and stupid and self-contradictory. I mean, I'll give you an example. It's just ask ChatGPT, why are the four sides of a square distinct from each other? Simple. I mean, identity of indiscernible principles of metaphysics. Why are the four sides of a square distinct? And they would say, they are because they are the same. Well, they are the same. They're distinct. So how do you spell it out? Are they distinct or the same? It's just there is something. I mean, to be honest, I mean there was something a little bit. Having lack of compassion towards the machine. I mean, but you'd see just how the machine is just nothing but a machine, nothing more than that.
You saw the Kevin Ruth, who a couple of years ago did a chat with Chet when it first came out, and the machine fell in love with Chet, fell in love with him, and it was he thought he talked about it afterward. He wrote about this, that he lost sleep over it. He was so troubled by this, and then it was Microsoft. Was it Microsoft? Yes. Who said to him, well, you shouldn't have asked him those questions. That was the response. Anyway, so go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, just one thought. I mean, it's prediction is a mug's game. I don't want to make any predictions and then be embarrassed by how false they turn out to be in a year. But so I can't say like exactly how AI is going to change the labor market or exactly who it's going to replace or not replace or whatever. The one thought that I think is one way of making a connection between the sort of current state of large language models and sort of popular standards of reasoning is there's this really helpful idea of the ironies of automation, where there's this like influential paper about this from the 80s, and they point out that like sometimes when you automate a process, it still requires some supervision. And people stop supervising the thing that needs supervision. So, you automate some machine, some part of a car production process, and the person on the factory floor says, "Great, time to take a nap," and then doesn't work out like that. It actually needs to be supervised. People see this with quote unquote self-driving cars, which still need interventions from human drivers very often. Those human drivers are in some data center 1,000 miles away, so hopefully the latency isn't too bad. We don't. And in any case, with ChatGPT, you see this with students and with non-students. sort of deferring to it. I think in part because it has the sort of veneer of objectivity that any machine has. It's sort of like, well, the computer tells me that this is a reference that I can cite for some claim. I guess it doesn't come up on Google, but the computer told me it's real. So I guess who am I to judge the computer? Ironies of automation are one mechanism by which people could be made less rational, worse at reasoning. Dumber's a mean word, but sure, dumber by the availability of large language models. It's something to worry about.
Can I just add another technique that people are using, and it's a step beyond the supervision. In the last philosophy of science class I was teaching, I had students get chat to write their papers, and then they corrected them, and they found that the chat was actually quite terrible at writing philosophy papers, and they were given terrible grades. And so they're rewriting these papers, and they felt they were not even worth rewriting, and so that they were, generating their own as well. That's a quite specialized topic. I think my intro students would be perfectly happy with any of the papers that came out. And that's one thing I would say to YITZHAK is I agree, like the banality, the incomprehension, the inability to even get its claws into a philosophical question, that's characteristic of AI. But at the same time, when we're inducting students into the idea of philosophy and trying to get them to take the first steps, they're about in the same boat. And so if they get short-circuited because they see that that ChatGPT is doing the same thing that they're doing, but just faster and at more length, then that is a significant worry, because they'll never find themselves in the position of being able to recognize the distinction between that kind of nonsense talk and the kind of nonsense that you and I engage in, hopefully somewhat more productively.
Thank you. So do we have time for one more question? All right, so here's a very philosophical question from Claudine. Is knowledge, just like money, also a currency for privilege and dominance, and maybe a false equivalent for wisdom and intelligence? That's classic Claudine. Is knowledge just like money also a currency for privilege and dominance, and maybe a false equivalent for wisdom and intelligence? So is knowledge the equivalent of wisdom and intelligence versus knowledge?
You're saying the definition of knowledge here seems to be just a lot of facts and information. Is that what we're saying here?
Yeah, and knowledge as a currency for privilege and dominance. So knowing a lot, is that the same as being wise?
It helps, but knowing a lot
or intelligent? Knowledge versus intelligence.
It's a hard one.
Can I take a stab at it? So like
it's very
if the question is like, can people use what they know to dominate one another in the ways that rich people dominate poor and working people? The answer is yes. Does knowledge have to work like that? I think the answer has to be no. There are all sorts of knowledgeable people out there who aren't domineering in the way that, annoying bosses are, or something like that, or your landlord is, or something.
True also of rich people, some.
Yeah, sure, fair, yeah. Yes.
Rich people aren't necessarily knowledgeable.
No, that they're not necessarily using their wealth to nefarious ends.
Right.
Yeah.
They're philanthropic.
I guess one interesting question is that I think is in the neighborhood, just because you bring in the idea of currency, is whether knowledge can be debased by overproduction, and that is something I genuinely have a really hard time wrapping my head around. I think I see a very compelling argument for no, and I see a compelling argument for yes. I think the compelling argument for no, it's not, is that it seems like when people create more knowledge, at least about useful or important things, you create more journal articles, do more experiments, on the whole, it seems to be better for the world on average, at least if it's on the other hand, we're hitting a point in the sort of like knowledge production industry where where people who need to be experts on some sub field can no longer keep up with the literature because there are too many articles that are published, or people are pressured into publishing smaller and smaller results, and when we should encourage scientists and knowledge workers to publish bigger results at a slower pace. I'm not sure how to reconcile those, what seem like two good arguments for opposing conclusions.
James, thoughts?
I guess I'm not sure I fully understood those answers. I don't, and so I'm just going to try to sort it out a little bit out loud, maybe. I mean, certainly there is something to the idea that the production of, and then let's just assume that the stuff that's in journals is knowledge, right? That the production of ever more knowledge in journals can be a kind of a self-defeating thing. But that's not really a question about the value of knowledge itself. It has more to do with our access and a different kind of knowledge that we don't have, which is the knowledge about how to navigate through this jumble. And so what's not being produced at the same rate, presumably, is the abstracting knowledge that's necessary in order to keep it all straight. And I mean, that said, I don't know that knowledge itself, has an intrinsic value. I take it that that we all should be truth motivated, and we should do what we can to believe true things. But those are only as useful as their actual utility is. I mean, yes, you can collect all the truths you want, but that's itself a kind of a fetishizing move. Whereas what you want the truth for is the kinds of good that can be done with it. Not to say that there is no truth, or that truth is only in the eye of the beholder. It's not that, but it's that it's only valuable insofar as it does something for us.
I'll just say that in journalism, there's more information available than ever before at our fingertips, unlike 20, 30 years ago even. And it's available instantly. I don't know that it's made people smarter, and I also think that just from reading my own paper and my competitors, there is so much out there to read right now. I'm sure it's overwhelming when you look at it, and so it's an accumulation of facts and information. But I think what's most helpful for what we do is telling readers this is what you should think about it, or this is what it means, and that kind of writing is actually very popular. We call them explainers or analysis and stuff. But it's interesting to me that there's so much information. There's not this kind of information when I got into the business in the early 80s, late 70s. I mean, you had to go and hunt through the morgue, newspaper clippings. It took a long time. You had to call people. It was, it just, collecting facts took a lot longer in those days, and they were less immediately available. But, I don't know that we're wiser now than we were then.
We're more intelligent.
Right.
We just have a lot more information.
Yeah.
Any further thoughts?
Yes, it struck me something funny. I remember something that we've talked about before in my family is, you remember when we were kids, you could have an argument about the facts that would last for days.
But now you can just look it up.
Right. Now but speaking about this question about are we more intelligent, are we more wise? I don't know whether we're more or less intelligent or more or less wise, but that is a tool for developing a kind of intelligence, a kind of wisdom, is dwelling in a way with this kind of uncertainty, dwelling with your brother, which I had as a who has one view and you have another, and it sits there for a while, but then when it's resolved, and there was never any further question.
Can I just ask you a question quickly? When you were had your Ask a Philosopher booth, I had two questions. One is, where did you have it in New York? And two, what was the most common question you got?
Great. We had I could talk about this all day. We set up the booth all over the place, in subway stations, in parks, at farmers markets, pride parades, street fairs. I think the most common question we got when people came with a fully formulated question, it was like, what's the meaning of life? So that's like a go-to example of a philosophical question, right? But more often, people didn't have, like, naturally, right? People didn't have like a fully formed philosophical question, like, ready to mind, right? So what ended up happening was, like, say, like, what have you been thinking about recently? What's on your mind? And then people would talk about personal problems, or they talk about the news, or they talk about sometimes like, or often, like, really abstract things. I'm worrying a lot about consciousness, or I'm worrying a lot about the interpretation of quantum mechanics, or whatever it is. And it was like, okay, well then, like, let's find the philosophical angle there. So more often it was a matter of like, well, people are thinking about some object, and some of the questions about that thing are philosophical questions, and then it's sort of finding the road back to philosophy that's the fun part. At least that's a fun part for me.
Reminds me, my daughter and her friend next door, when they were kids, set up we didn't know, but they set up a booth outside on the sidewalk outside of our two houses, and it was a model of the Lucy's psychiatric booth in Peanuts, and they had the thing, the doctor is in, 5 cents. And I remember my neighbor called and said, I don't mean to alarm you, but there's a woman sitting outside getting advice from them. That's what I think of you.
I'm exactly as unqualified as you are.
No, I think that's great. I wish I had stumbled upon that. There's so many deep philosophical questions that you would want to ask somebody, like, what is the meaning of all this?
It's such a good story. I wish it would be fun to write a story. Did anybody write a story about you?
It was written up actually in the Times once, years ago, and started in 2016.
Who was the reporter?
It was the person who ran the daily, the New York Today vertical or whatever. I'll say one thing just to tie it back to the theme of the night. There are lots of reasons why you might want to open up space for philosophical reflection and interaction in people's lives, right? People are lonely or alienated, and they want, like, more meaningful connection with other people. Or people just have, like, pet theories that they're just bursting out of their chest that they just have to tell other people. Or people could really stand to, explore their regions of agreement and disagreement with other people, and get a little bit of practice at reasoning, to standards that sort of that are set by the community in some sense. It's an occupational hazard of philosophers to think that, like, philosophy is the answer to everything. So it's definitely not, like, it's not going to stop the planet from melting. But, like, there's a little role for philosophy here, that partly because people are alienated, partly because people are theoretical animals and they just want to express their theoretical ideas, and then partly because sometimes, iron sharpens iron or whatever, but people actually get better at reasoning by talking things out with one another. There's a role for philosophical spaces in solving those problems. Yeah.
Interesting, very interesting.
So we're going to do Q&A now. And if anybody in the audience has any questions, you can raise your hand. Anybody have questions? Sorry, it's distant.
Good evening. My name is Zeke Botakuma. I am professor of philosophy at Morgan State University in Baltimore. I'm very happy to join you for this talk that is taking place at a law school. Lawyers are becoming more important. Lawyers are having more jobs now because there are many bad things happening. And before we say or do anything, we always have to think twice because you don't know who is around you. I hope that none of the people in our audience is there for some other purposes than learning about things. One of the questions raised in this room was, what is distinctive about our time? I'm sure everybody has some answer to that question. My own answer to this question is moral and legal confusion is distinctive of our time. Anti-intellectualism is distinctive of our time. Now, some people do believe that morality can be taught. Law, right, wrong can be taught. So who is going to teach it? That's the question. Listening to people who spoke, they talk about fear being everywhere, but nobody said they were personally afraid. Well, I am afraid in this current political atmosphere. And the problem is not about being afraid, but what we do out of fear. And you may remember some saying that fear is the dark room where negatives are developed. I hope that we are not going to be developing negatives out of the fear we are having at this time. Thank you very much. No question. Just talk.
So you do women's law and domestic violence. And I'm wondering, there's a thing, it's called the Duluth Power and Control Wheel.
Right.
In domestic violence. And it seems to me, and it's a whole set of behaviors that get implemented by the abuser. And I wonder if you think that if there's an increase in knowledge about domestic violence and that has it gone up the government or is it coming down from the government? You don't understand what I'm asking?
So do you think that the current political world, is it causing more intimate partner violence or less?
Well, it's doing it it's institutionalizing it.
So, you know, the whole intimate partner violence, the characteristics is obviously not just a problem in the United States, it's worldwide. You know, it's relationship, and it's in certain, the Duluth model with coercive control in a relationship, whether the abuser is a man or a woman, the person who has that power is able to control their partner through violence or threat of violence. And so during the pandemic, it certainly did increase because there was much more isolation. And so different characteristics were more prevalent. There was more financial strains. There was more isolation. There were those stressors involved in it. So that increased, at least in Baltimore, the incidences of intimate partner violence. And I think that probably is pretty much around the country. I think this current political atmosphere could be making intimate partner violence more prevalent, or certainly people not paying attention to it as much? Yes, I do. I mean, I, again, don't want to talk too much about politics, but I do think some statements like, women, I'm going to get your husbands back to work. There was a comment made by a politician, I don't remember who it was, and certainly the overturn of Dobbs. I mean, the Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision, when, you know, women not having bodily autonomy, that plays a role into this as well. So I do think that is something we need to be aware of. And Obviously, the Office of Violence Against Women during the first Trump presidency tried to eliminate that office, and I'm certain that that will be something that will happen again. And those federal grants that fund nonprofits that do this work for intimate partner violence are certainly being threatened. So we have another question. So I mean, I could go on and on.
I'm just suggesting that maybe those same techniques that are used in the intimate violence are also being used by our government against all of us, and that we're actually all.
Thank you.
I mean, that's a good analogy.
Violent.
Yeah.
Okay, this works. All right. Jeremy Williams. I am also a Morgan State student, but I also host public philosophy here in the city that I just started a couple of months ago. And I did it because I felt like it was my way of doing something with the current climate. But I can't help but wonder, as we talk about knowledge and reasoning that we determine that it's flawed, should we do something about this? Like, if this is the reasoning that people seem to have been voted for, manipulated into doing and believing these sort of actions, and there's a bunch of systems set up in place for people to act a certain sort of way, I just wonder, why push back? If that makes sense.
I want to. People vote. It was not a landslide. Okay. Yeah. It was not. It was a close election. It was not. So about half the country voted one way. The other half thinks the other way. So I would say, I don't want to say that this is what America necessarily wants. It's what half of the country wants, which is a lot. Anyway, that's my answer. I always want to make that clear to people. It wasn't a landslide.
There was no mandate.
There's this idea of the paradox of democracy, right? Which is that, like, you want whoever wins an election to take office, but you also might not want that person to take office. And how can you want both things at the same time? However you answer that paradox might help you answer the problem that you're facing here. I mean, one thing I'll say is that I don't think this helps answer the paradox, but it might help answer your problem, is that there's more to democracy than elections. There are people don't, for example, have much control in setting the ballot, and people don't have much control over the spaces in which they reason or deliberate about the choices in front of them, and we live in this sort of highly gerrymandered electoral democracy where there's you vote for a handful of offices and then they check back in with you every N years, and maybe they've listened to what you want, maybe they haven't. Maybe the answer is more democracy, please. More democracy in our workplaces, more democracy in municipal government, more democracy at different levels involving different communities. And again, philosophy isn't 100% the solution here, but philosophers have a role to play in convening the spaces where people deliberate.
And maybe I could just say something from a completely different point, just like the arbiters of knowledge, which I don't think we really are the arbiters of knowledge, but I want to push back on just a little bit of your question. But why should we be combating flawed reasoning if so many folks seem like they want that? I mean, lots of people want lots of things that aren't necessarily good for them, and I'm not going to force anybody. That's not my business. Well, maybe my undergraduate students, but our business isn't to force people in that, but more to invite them into to seeing as you and your colleagues and we have all seen that there's something both beautiful about reasoning properly and attempting to follow the reasoning wherever it goes. but it's just, a kind of a love for the truth should motivate all of us to be better at getting it. And if that involves telling somebody that they're not doing it right and putting yourself in that kind of a position, then maybe that's something that you owe to the truth if you're a lover of it.
Thank you.
There's still one more question.
Okay.
Well, thank you first for a great conversation. But to follow up on what was just said, I guess I'm wondering. I'm going to assume there's a consensus on reducing flawed reasoning, and say, do you think it would help? Can we teach children to do a better job in terms of elementary schools and middle schools and being more discerning and evaluating what's true and what's false, and they don't, fall prey to the falsehoods that are out there? If we get them young enough, is that going to make a difference? I always go back to my son in school, and his generation seemed like we really did a good job with tobacco. Really, can we do something? It's different to teach a process of thinking, but would that help?
I'll just say, again, philosophy is not always the answer, but it's kind of always the answer. The people who, of all of the varieties of public philosophy for children, like teaching philosophy in K through 12 classrooms, is the one that's been best studied empirically. And there's just a ton of research with variations on like a cognitive reflection test showing improvements in young people's reasoning after taking these philosophy classes. Sometimes these, at least in some studies, they're like longitudinal, and the effects last years. Those effects are wild enough that it's like you have to take it with a grain of salt, because it's like, okay, this is so cool it has to be fake. But okay, with the grain of salt, yeah, if like there's at least some evidence that there's tons of evidence that that philosophy classes will improve children's reasoning in the short run, as measured by performance on cognitive reflection tests, and a little bit of evidence that it'll increase their performance on these tests like 2 years out from taking the class, which is nuts. That's nuts. You never see anything that has an effect 2 years after it happens. The short answer is yes. There's also, outside of philosophy, there's also all these sorts of programs for teaching like media literacy to young people, which are, I think I know the empirical literature here not as well, but like seems like it works reasonably well. Sometimes people sort of despair about, oh man, how can we ever teach adults to like learn whether someone is lying to you on the internet? It's like, I don't know, you can teach 8-year-olds how to learn whether someone's lying to you on the internet. It's not that hard. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I was just thinking to add, another thing, not just putting philosophy into the schools, but taking many things out of the schools. And so I'm on the curriculum committee at Georgetown, and students can get out of all kinds of classes if they've got a high score on their ACT or whatever. And those are just incredibly terrible measures, because they're not teaching them anything about the subjects. They're teaching them everything about the tests. And so it's just this huge quantity of data. Going back to the monetary analogy, it's just like a giant quantity of, but it's all in pennies. Instead of giving them like a $1 bill at the end of the semester or something. I don't know what the right analogy is there, but the being overwhelmed by factual information, as so many of the students are in their science classes and their math classes, that's exactly the wrong way to do it. But everything about how we've structured the K through 12 curriculum reinforces that kind of a model.
Well, I want to thank you. I really thank you to our esteemed guests for coming out tonight, and thank you for all of you for joining us.